Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Progressive American. I'm Connor, back with another morning podcast about the week's news from a progressive perspective. Welcome back to the show. It is Saturday, August 28th, and today we have a lot to discuss, including the fall of Afghanistan, the January 6th Commission, Ashli Babbit, and much more. With that out of the way, let's jump into the news. The government of Afghanistan fell last Sunday as the Taliban took Kabul after nearly 20 years of war. The fallout shocked the world, especially in the face of U.S. intelligence reports that claimed that the Afghan government would fall within 90 days instead of a week. Afghan President Ashraf Ghani fled to the country of Tajikistan, according to Afghan officials. After the fall, Afghans and Americans fled to the Kabul airport in the hopes of escaping the country. In response, the Biden administration announced that they would send nearly 6,000 troops to help support the program to withdraw refugees and American diplomats. The effort continued among reports that the Taliban is stopping people with valid visas from going to the airport, which they deny. Still, American efforts to evacuate people from the country has not gone without some success despite the intense and chaotic situation. The United States has managed to evacuate more than 100,000 people through the Kabul airport. However, U.S. officials warn that there are at least 1,000 Americans still in Afghanistan, along with tens of thousands of Afghans who helped the United States government as interpreters, and the U.S. is struggling to meet its date for withdrawal of August 31st. In other words, the U.S. is running out of time to save lives from the Taliban, who, though denying any plans for reprisals, have already begun using lists of suspected interpreters to arrest and or kill. Then there was a bombing that killed nearly 200 Afghans along with 13 U.S. service members. The attack was carried out by an ISIS affiliate group known as ISIS-K. In response, Biden gave the following comments in an address on Wednesday.
These American service members who gave their lives, it's an overused word, but it's totally appropriate here, were heroes. Heroes who've been engaged in a dangerous, selfless mission to save the lives of others. They're a part of an airlift and evacuation effort unlike any seen in history, with more than 100,000 American citizens, American partners, Afghans who helped us, and others taken to safety in the last 11 days. Just in the last 12 hours or so, another 7,000 have gotten out. They were part of the bravest, most capable, the most selfless military on the face of the earth. And they're part of simply what I call the backbone of America. They're the spine of America, the best the country has to offer.
Continuing through his speech, Biden warned that ISIS-K's attacks wouldn't be forgotten and that the consequences of that attack will be reciprocated in kind. He further emphasized that the U.S. would do everything within its power to secure the remaining refugees, both American and Afghan, and ensure their safe removal from the now fallen country. I want to start my remarks today not by downplaying the severity of what is happening in Afghanistan, nor do I want to continue with whataboutism or partisanship. This has been an issue for a long time, and the decisions of multiple administrations have led us to this moment. The Trump administration's decision to release 5,000 Taliban agents in an ill-planned and ill-considered attempt at appeasement with the Taliban could easily be blamed for this, but that wouldn't save any lives. Additionally, the failure to consider the severe vulnerability of the Afghan government and the rapid withdrawal of the Biden administration made it extremely difficult for the Afghan government to withstand attacks by the Taliban, despite their military's numbers. But arguing over that also won't save lives. What I want to say now is that hindsight and finger-pointing are useless, and I'm guilty of venting some of these same points. But now that things have escalated and there is a clear effort by both the Taliban and ISIS affiliates to block the evacuation process, we must unify around the only position we have left, saving people's lives. We are faced with the choice of engaging in endless partisan hackery or focusing on the task at hand and doing everything we can to get our government to do the same, even if it means delaying the withdrawal of our troops past the August 31st deadline. Many of these people are fleeing unimaginable suffering and tyranny, something we should pray we never have to face. We can't bring the Afghan government back, but we can save thousands of lives. It's the least we can do. So if there's one thing you can take from all of this, it's this. No number of armchair generals or Twitter threads will save lives. Pressure on the Biden administration and on our government to resettle these Afghan refugees and American operatives will. We have the opportunity to do an unequivocal good in saving these people, and we can do it, but only if we focus on the task at hand. In domestic news, we turn to the January 6th Commission. Talking Points memo reported on Wednesday that the Commission to investigate the January 6th insurrection had requested a large cache of documents from 8 agencies of the U.S. government relating to former President Donald Trump's involvement in the infamous attack on the Capitol building. Among the agencies under scrutiny by the Commission is the National Archives and Records Administration, which currently holds records from Trump's time in the White House. They are also requesting documents from the Department of Defense, Homeland Security, and the Interior. The Commission appears to be interested in documents related to Trump's communications from April 1st of 2020 to the end of his presidency, in what seems to be an attempt to reconstruct Trump's alleged attempt to hold on to power despite his loss to then-President-elect Joe Biden. The Commission has also requested documents related to others such as former New Jersey Governor Chris Christie. They are also investigating the role Trump's appointments to the DOJ and other agencies played in his attempt to overturn the election, along with allegation that Trump intended to use the military to keep himself in office. The deadline for the documents is September 9th. In response to the inquiry, the former president released a statement saying, "The Leftist Select Committee has further exposed itself as a partisan sham and waste of taxpayer dollars with a request that's timed to distract Americans from historic and global catastrophes brought on by the failures of Joe Biden and the Democrats. Unfortunately, this partisan exercise is being performed at the expense of long-standing legal principles of privilege," end quote. Aside from the clear political attacks of Trump's rhetoric, he is also protesting in vain, as executive privilege doesn't extend beyond the end of a president's time in office. These documents are in the jurisdiction of the National Archives, which can release the documents at their will so long as no statutes are prohibiting them from doing so or a court order of a similar vein is in effect. What happens next is anyone's guess, but what is important to remember is that the Commission started as bipartisan until Republicans refused to support the Commission in the vote. Trump could have had his allies working on this, but instead he's facing the consequences of his party's obstructionism, and nothing can stop that. Not his blog site, not his friends at Fox News, and not his misunderstanding of executive privilege. When I read this story for the podcast, I couldn't help but think of this old saying about partisan rhetoric. A hit dog will holler, and boy does that apply here. This is everything that Trump has sown, and it's his own fault that he's in this situation. In more January 6th news, the officer who shot insurrectionist Ashli Babbit has come forward to defend his actions in spite of far-right efforts to demonize and dox him. Capitol Police Lieutenant Michael Byrd has announced in a recent interview with NBC's Lester Holt that he was the one who shot Ashli Babbit. Byrd has become the target of multiple threats over time by the right, with some going so far as to treat him as a murderer despite his efforts to defend the Capitol from violent insurrectionists, many of whom were shouting about hanging then Vice President Mike Pence. Describing the threats, Lieutenant Byrd explained his experience, saying,
"They talked about, killing me, cutting off my head, very vicious and cruel things.
Racist things?
There were some racist attacks as well. It's all disheartening."
Now, considering the testimony of Michael Byrd and the fact that this attack resulted in the deaths of several other people, and several of the rioters came and attacked officers on Capitol grounds, it would stand to reason that Republicans and those aligned with them would act with some degree of restraint. Unfortunately, that is not the case. Representative Paul Gosar has famously promoted the idea that Ashli Babbit was executed instead of what actually happened, which is that she was shot storming the Capitol.
Mr. Rosen, do you recall the name of the young lady, a veteran wrapped in an American flag, that was killed in the U.S. Capitol?
I do. Her name was Ashli Babbit.
Yes, Ashli Babbit. Was Ashli Babbit armed?
Again, Congressman, I mean to be respectful of your
Rosen,
observations, but I just don't want to talk about individual
Rosen,
situations.
I'm clearly reclaiming my time, Mr. Rosen. No, she wasn't. She was wrapped in a U.S. flag. Was the death of Ashli Babbit a homicide?
Congressman, I'm not trying to be unhelpful here, but I just cannot comment.
I understand, but I mean, reclaiming my time, as the death certificate says, it was a homicide. Who executed Ashli Babbit?
Congressman, I'm just going to have to say the same thing here, that I don't want to get into the specific facts
Thank
of
you very
investigations.
much. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Now, Chief Conte, what are the rules of engagement at the D.C. protests?
This consistent effort by the right to portray Babbit as a martyr is a problem, not only because it puts Byrd at risk, but because it also means that Republicans may target him for the purposes of their political rhetoric in the upcoming midterms. Though what remains true is that Ashli Babbit, though a veteran, broke the law and attacked the Capitol building through her attempted storming of the Speaker's Hall. If you want to know who killed Ashli Babbit, you can look at all the people who sold her a lie that the election was stolen and encouraged her to take action against the duly elected government of the United States, which she swore to protect. I'm not here to celebrate her death, but she's dead not because of some unfounded allegation that Officer Byrd wanted to kill her for no reason. She's dead because she violated her oath and threatened our republic with force. It's a sad truth, a tragic truth, but it's the truth nonetheless, and Republicans have to learn to accept it. In less violent news, we turn to the debate over masks in Florida. On Friday, a federal judge in the Second Circuit handed Florida Governor Ron DeSantis a defeat, ruling that schools can enforce mask mandates. In doing so, the court sided with parents in these schools who argued that the Florida Constitution requires the government to protect the safety of people within the state, with masks if necessary. Lawyers for DeSantis argued that the new Bill of Rights in the Constitution of Florida gives individuals the right to decide whether or not they want to mask, but the court ruled against him, arguing that it gave discretion to the schools to enforce masks if necessary. It's also worth noting that Florida's COVID rate is above 14,000 cases per 100,000 people, and its cases have continued to rise. Not only that, but a study conducted by The Lancet found that half of the hospitalized COVID-19 patients surveyed experienced complications in their health as soon as a year after they were infected. I bring this up not as a matter of partisanship, but as a matter of responsibility. People like DeSantis refuse to use government power when necessary to protect the people that they are serving. Even in the face of death and rising Delta variant cases, Ron DeSantis and others will try to pretend that they care about the rights of the people without so much as a second of consideration as to how their decisions hurt innocent people. They will likely appeal this, but the fact that the court won't let DeSantis put people at risk is a bit of good news in an otherwise brutal and dark world. In unfortunate news, the Supreme Court has ruled against the eviction moratorium that was instituted by the Biden administration. The court ruled that the CDC, which imposed the moratorium, does not have the authority to restrict the decisions of landlords and has put over 6 million households at risk of eviction thanks to this decision. This crisis, which has been brewing for months, has now escalated and is increasingly present in the minds of public health officials. Many of these tenants have struggled to get aid from the local and state governments to pay for their rent, with many of them struggling to retain their jobs after a year of COVID. These same families are at additional risk thanks to the fact that their unemployment benefits will be declining and going down soon, meaning that they will have nothing to support them if they get evicted. Aside from the obvious cruelty of having mass evictions, this sends a message that the government will not protect people in their times of economic desperation and emergency, which will further erode the public trust in America. And perhaps more selfishly, we should consider the risk to public health. With no guaranteed housing, it becomes even more difficult for these people to isolate themselves in place if they're infected. With all this considered, it's pretty clear that the Supreme Court has taken a precarious situation which they could have avoided and refused to rule on, and made it all the more worse by their ruling. If there ever was any evidence that we have to take responsibility for who goes onto the court and makes reforms in our government, this is it. In a time of emergency, a conservative majority disregarded the needs of our people when they needed that court to be with them the most. And that is utterly atrocious. Thank you very much for listening. If you enjoyed, feel free to share it around on all the social media platforms that you desire. As always, you can check out my social media accounts and other works with the links on my About page. If you want to support my work, you can check out the podcast notes and help out any way you want. Thanks again for listening, and I hope you have a wonderful day. See you later.